My name is Jasmine. I am 33 years old, and my own parents just banned me from our family Christmas party because my presence would ruin their wealthy aesthetic. Standing in the marble foyer of their luxury downtown penthouse, my mother snatched a bottle of vintage wine from my hands, calling it cheap trash unfit for her elite guests. My father chimed in, telling me my business was an embarrassment compared to my white brother-in-law and his hedge fund. They told me to pack up and go back to my modest little life. I did not scream or cry. I simply smiled, looked my brother-in-law dead in the eye, and walked away. What none of them knew was that I secretly owned that exact penthouse, and in less than 24 hours I would change every single lock, deactivate their private elevator, and leave them out in the freezing snow. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The sharp click of my mother, Yvonne, and her fresh acrylic nails against the glass bottle echoed through the sprawling foyer. She snatched the vintage Pinot Noir right out of my hands with a look of pure disgust, wrinkling her perfectly contoured face. I stood there in the entryway of the downtown penthouse, the heels of my boots sinking slightly into the plush custom rug, and watched her march over to the kitchen island. She slammed the bottle down on the quartz countertop, a countertop I had secretly paid for, and grabbed a sanitizing wipe. She began furiously scrubbing the marble surface as if my mere presence had contaminated the space. "You actually thought bringing this was acceptable, Jasmine," she snapped, not even looking at me. "Pastor Thomas and the senior deacons are coming to the Christmas Eve gala tomorrow night. We are hosting the most elite members of the church board, and Trevor is bringing his top-tier investors. I cannot have them seeing this bargain bin liquid sitting on my wet bar. It is embarrassing. You are embarrassing me." I took a slow breath, forcing my face to remain perfectly blank. The wine I had brought was a rare vintage that cost more than my mother used to make in a week, but in her eyes nothing I touched would ever be valuable. For 33 years, nothing I did was ever enough to earn a seat at her table. I watched her violently polish the pristine counters, fixated on projecting an image of generational wealth to a church congregation that thrived on gossip and status. Before I could formulate a calm response, the heavy oak door of the home office swung open. The scent of expensive and overpowering cologne flooded the hallway before my father Calvin even stepped into view. He walked out, adjusting the heavy gold Rolex on his left wrist, his expression hardening the second his eyes landed on me. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my drive across the city had been in the freezing sleet. He simply looked me up and down, taking in my tailored but understated wool coat. "I told you to dress appropriately if you were coming over today," Calvin said, his voice carrying that booming, authoritative tone he used to intimidate his employees. "We have caterers and event planners arriving in an hour to set up the gala. You look like you just clocked out of a warehouse shift. This is exactly what your mother and I were discussing. You do not fit the Wall Street aesthetic we need to project tomorrow night." "I own a property acquisitions firm, Dad," I said, keeping my tone completely even. "I close commercial real estate deals. I do not work in a warehouse." Calvin scoffed, waving his hand through the air as if swatting away a fly. "Please, Jasmine, buying up run-down buildings and flipping them is a glorified landlord hustle. It is small time. It is not real wealth. Look at your brother-in-law. Trevor runs a legitimate hedge fund. He manages real capital. That is the standard of success in this family now. We cannot have you showing up tomorrow night, talking about fixing leaky roofs and collecting rent checks, while Trevor is trying to secure millions in capital from his high society network. It reflects poorly on us." I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hands, suppressing a laugh that threatened to bubble up from my throat. A glorified landlord hustle. My father stood there, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, lecturing me about real wealth while completely oblivious to the fact that my property acquisitions firm owned the very floor he was standing on. Right on cue, the private elevator chimed at the end of the hall. The polished silver doors slid open, revealing my younger sister Kiara and her husband Trevor. Kiara was the undisputed golden child of the family. She stepped out of the elevator dripping in designer labels, carrying shopping bags that likely cost more than a college tuition. Trevor walked beside her with the smug, entitled posture of a man who believed the world owed him a favor just for existing. He wore a cashmere quarter-zip sweater and a condescending smirk that had irritated me from the moment I met him. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Kiara said, handing her shopping bags to my mother, who received them like holy relics. "I thought you would be too busy dealing with broken toilets today, Jasmine." Trevor chuckled, wrapping an arm around Kiara and pulling her close. He looked at me with an expression of pure pity. "Do not feel bad, sport," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Not everyone is cut out for the penthouse lifestyle. It takes a certain kind of pedigree to handle this level of pressure. You stick to your little apartments. Leave the heavy lifting to the big dogs." The audacity of this man was staggering. Trevor stood in my penthouse, breathing my air, and had the nerve to call me sport. He was a walking, breathing fraud, maintaining his finance bro facade, while I knew exactly how empty his bank accounts truly were. But I did not say a word. I let him puff out his chest and play the wealthy benefactor because the trap I had set required total silence. Yvonne abandoned the shopping bags and walked back over to me, her face set in a mask of cold determination. She picked up my coat from the chair where I had draped it and held it out to me. Her actions were deliberate and calculated, designed to make me feel as small as possible. "Jasmine, I think it is best if you just go," Yvonne said, pushing the heavy wool fabric into my chest. "In fact, I think it is best if you do not come tomorrow night at all." I looked at her, letting the words hang in the air. "You are disinviting me from Christmas Eve dinner." "I am protecting our family image," Yvonne corrected without a single ounce of hesitation. "Kiara and Trevor have worked incredibly hard to establish themselves in the upper echelon of this city. Your father and I have a reputation to uphold with the church board. Having you here single, unpolished, and talking about your modest little life is going to ruin the aesthetic we have carefully curated. It is confusing for the guests. We do not want them wondering why one daughter is married to a Wall Street genius while the other is still struggling to figure out her life." Kiara laughed, a high-pitched grating sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Honestly, Mom is right, Jasmine. It is just embarrassing. Remember when I got my new Porsche Cayenne for my birthday, and you pulled up to the driveway in that used Honda Civic you bought yourself in college? Trevor's friends were laughing about it for weeks. You just do not fit in with our crowd anymore. It is better for everyone if you stay home." I looked at Calvin, expecting him to intervene to offer even a shred of parental defense. Instead, my father crossed his arms and nodded in agreement with Kiara. "Go home, Jasmine," he commanded. "We will send you a plate of leftovers on Sunday. Do not cause a scene and ruin your sister's holiday." For 33 years, I had swallowed their insults. I had endured the comparisons, the subtle digs, and the blatant disrespect, because I foolishly believed that one day they would see my value. I had worked myself to the bone to build an empire, silently hoping my parents would eventually look at me with the same pride they showered on Kiara. But standing in that foyer, looking at the four of them standing united against me, I finally understood the truth. They did not want me to succeed. They needed me to be the failure so they could feel superior. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not try to defend my business or my life. I simply took my coat from my mother and slipped it over my shoulders. I buttoned it slowly, making sure every movement was composed and deliberate. I smoothed down my lapels and picked up my designer tote bag. I walked past my mother, ignoring her completely. I walked past my father, who refused to meet my gaze. I stopped right in front of Trevor. I looked up into his smug, arrogant face, letting a slow, knowing smile spread across my lips. "Enjoy the penthouse, Trevor," I said, my voice soft but laced with pure ice. Trevor blinked, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second, as confusion flashed in his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. I stepped into the private elevator and turned around, facing my family, as the polished silver doors began to slide shut. The last image I saw was Yvonne furiously wiping down the counter again, trying to erase any trace that I had ever been there. The heavy doors sealed shut, locking me in the quiet sanctuary of the elevator car. The moment I was alone, my calm facade melted into sharp, focused determination. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly authenticated my identity, opening the secure encrypted application my firm used to manage high-level assets. I scrolled past dozens of commercial properties and luxury developments until I found the specific file I needed. I tapped the screen, opening the official digitized property deed for the penthouse I had just been kicked out of. I stared at the legal documentation, taking in every line of text. The listed owner of the $10 million property was not Trevor. It was not Calvin or Yvonne. The deed clearly displayed the name of my holding company, my LLC, my property. I pressed the call button on my phone, bypassing my assistant and dialing my head of security directly. The line rang twice before a deep professional voice answered. "Yes, Miss Jasmine." "Cancel my holiday plans," I instructed, my voice echoing in the small elevator car. "We have an eviction to execute." I dropped my phone onto the passenger seat of my Range Rover and merged into the slick downtown traffic. The sleet was coming down harder now, whipping against my windshield, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice in my veins. I tapped the display screen on my dashboard, bringing up my secured financial ledger. The glow of the spreadsheet illuminated the dark interior of my car. I navigated straight to the accounts receivable for the downtown penthouse property. Zero. That was the exact amount Trevor had transferred to my holding company this month. I kept my eyes on the road as I scrolled through the trailing columns. It was the exact amount he had paid for the last 6 months. 2 years ago, Trevor played the big shot genius of the financial world until his boutique hedge fund quietly went belly up. He was drowning in debt, and the bank was literally hours away from slapping a public foreclosure notice on that pristine penthouse door. I knew my mother. Yvonne would rather face a firing squad than endure the humiliation of losing her status among the church elite. The gossip alone would have destroyed her. So I stepped in. I formed a blind trust and bought the entire property in cash. I kept the title buried under layers of corporate anonymity, allowing my parents to continue their lavish lifestyle while fully believing their golden white son-in-law was the ultimate provider. Trevor knew the truth, of course. I vividly remembered sitting across from him in my office 2 years ago, watching him sweat through his custom-tailored suit as he signed the rental agreement with my holding company. He was a coward who preferred living a financial lie over admitting to Kiara and my parents that he was completely broke. He begged me to keep it a secret, claiming he just needed time to rebuild his capital. I gave him that time to protect my parents' pride. And how did they repay me? By letting him stand in my penthouse, breathing my air, and calling my highly successful property acquisitions firm a glorified landlord hustle while he was half a year behind on rent. The sheer audacity of his performance in the foyer was staggering, but it only fueled the fire I was ready to unleash. My dashboard chimed with an incoming text message, breaking through my thoughts. It was a picture from Kiara. She was holding up her wrist to the light, showing off a massive diamond tennis bracelet. The text below it read, "Trevor spoils me so much. By the way, transfer $500 to my account for some last-minute caviar, since you are not buying us gifts this year." I stared at the message, feeling a genuine smile touch my face for the first time all day. She wanted $500. My sister was flaunting a piece of jewelry her husband likely bought on a maxed-out credit card while sitting in a home he did not own, and demanding I subsidize their luxury appetizers. I pressed the voice-to-text button on my steering wheel and dictated my reply, keeping my tone light and breezy. "I have got your Christmas completely handled." I pulled into the secure underground garage of my corporate office building. I took the private elevator up to my floor, bypassing the usual end-of-day reports from my staff. Once inside my corner office, I took off my coat and pulled out the architectural blueprints for the penthouse from my secured filing cabinet. I spread the large blue sheets across my glass desk, tracing the entry points with my index finger. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my private security contractor. I authorized a $500 rush fee on top of their premium holiday rate routing, the exact amount Kiara had demanded, straight to the locksmith's invoice. I did not want to simply serve them legal eviction papers. That was too quiet, too private. Yvonne thrived on public perception, so the illusion needed to shatter exactly where she valued it most. I wanted a total security wipe, and I wanted it scheduled for the morning of December 23rd. That was the day before my mother would host her grand Christmas Eve gala. I knew Yvonne's schedule perfectly. She would be utterly consumed with her social image out, getting her hair styled, directing caterers, and obsessing over last-minute floral arrangements. It was the absolute perfect window to strike while they were distracted by their own vanity. My contractor confirmed the details over the speakerphone, his voice crisp and professional. "We are looking at military-grade biometric locks on the main double doors, Ms. Jasmine. We will recode all the underground garage bays and completely wipe the security chips in the private elevator fobs. If a person is not on the new approved list, they do not get past the lobby." I looked down at the blueprint, tapping my pen against the glass. "Do it," I said without a single ounce of hesitation. I hit the approve button on the digital invoice that popped up on my computer screen. The transaction cleared instantly. The trap was set and armed. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, pouring myself a glass of rich red wine. They wanted to protect their aesthetic and keep the failures out of their elite circle. I was simply going to help them secure the premises. The morning of December 23rd arrived with a biting frost that settled over the city skyline. The next 48 hours were going to be a masterclass in dismantling a facade. I woke up and immediately opened the shared family calendar app on my phone. Kiara was incredibly diligent about logging her luxury appointments, mostly so she could ensure everyone in her social orbit knew exactly how pampered she was. Today, her schedule was blocked out entirely in a vibrant shade of pink. Trevor had booked her, my mother Yvonne, and my father Calvin for an all-day VIP retreat at the Grand Hotel Spa. It was the perfect decoy. Trevor was running on fumes, and fumes do not pay for hot stone massages. I knew for a fact he had charged that entire spa package to a high-interest credit card that was one swipe away from being declined just to get them out of the penthouse so he could pretend to work. I sat in my parked Range Rover across the street from the luxury high-rise, watching the underground garage exit. Right at 9 o'clock, Calvin drove his pristine luxury SUV up the ramp. I could see the silhouettes of my mother and sister in the back seat, undoubtedly already sipping sparkling water and complaining about the traffic. The second their vehicle turned the corner and merged onto the main avenue, I picked up my phone and gave the signal. My security team arrived in 2 unmarked vans. We bypassed the lobby, taking the service elevator straight to the top floor. Using the master override codes I had secured as the legal property owner, I opened the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse and stepped inside. The space smelled strongly of my mother's signature floral perfume and expensive burning candles. I walked slowly across the imported marble floors, letting my eyes wander over the 5,000 square feet of curated perfection. The velvet sofas, the crystal chandeliers, the modern art pieces hanging on the walls. Yvonne had designed this entire space to project an image of untouchable generational wealth. But standing there looking at the luxury they flaunted in my face, I felt nothing but cold clarity. All of this was built on my silent charity and Trevor and his mountain of lies. I remembered being 17 years old and asking my parents to help me pay for a preparatory course for my college entrance exams. Yvonne had looked at me and scoffed, telling me that academics did not need to be flashy and that we had to save our resources for Kiara and her upcoming debutante ball. My sister needed a custom gown to impress the right kind of people. I was told to find a part-time job and stop being so demanding. Now I was standing in a multi-million-dollar property that I owned entirely while they lived inside my walls pretending they were royalty. I gestured to the lead contractor to get to work. The quiet morning was instantly shattered by the loud screech of power drills. Sparks flew as my team systematically bored out the old locking cylinders on the main entrance doors. They did not pack a single piece of furniture. I was not interested in touching their belongings. I was only interested in securing my perimeter. Heavy-duty military-grade biometric panels were mounted onto the oak framing. Wires were stripped and connected to a localized server that I controlled directly from my encrypted phone. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the snow begin to dust the city below, when the soft chime of the private elevator echoed through the hallway. The digital numbers above the metallic doors ticked upward. Someone was coming up. My security contractor paused, lowering his drill. I held up my hand, signaling him to wait. The polished silver doors slid open, and Trevor stepped out into the private vestibule. I was patting the pockets of his cashmere coat, muttering to himself about a forgotten watch. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes darted from the sparks falling onto the marble floor, to the burly contractors dismantling the front door, and finally to me standing calmly in the center of the foyer. "What the hell is going on here?" Trevor barked. He puffed his chest out, attempting to project the authority of a wealthy Wall Street titan defending his castle. "Get away from my door right now. Who let you people up here?" I did not raise my voice. I did not move quickly. I simply reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper printed on heavy stock. I walked over to the entryway console table and slid the document across the smooth glass surface. "I highly suggest you lower your voice, Trevor," I said, my tone dropping the temperature in the room. "And I suggest you look at this before you embarrass yourself further." Trevor marched over to the console, his face red with indignation. He snatched the paper up. I watched the exact second his arrogant facade completely crumbled. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the bright foyer lights. It was the official rent ledger from my holding company. It showed 6 consecutive months of missed payments totaling exactly $0. Below that was a printed copy of the deed with my signature bold and clear at the bottom. The expensive cashmere sweater suddenly looked cheap on his trembling frame. He dropped the paper back onto the table as if it had burned him. "Jasmine," he stammered, the fake confidence completely vanishing from his voice. "Jasmine, come on. We are family. You cannot do this. I just need a little more time. The market has been brutal, but I have a deal closing next quarter. I swear I will pay you back every cent with interest." "You have not had a deal close in 2 years, Trevor," I said, crossing my arms. "Your hedge fund is a ghost town. You are drowning in debt, and you are using my silence to keep your wife and my parents comfortable. But yesterday you stood in this very room and told me I was not cut out for the penthouse lifestyle. You let my mother kick me out of my own property, so your time is officially up." He took a step toward me, his hands raised in a desperate pleading gesture. "Please, Jasmine," he begged, his voice cracking. "The Christmas Eve gala is tomorrow night. Your parents have invited the entire church board. My remaining investors are coming. If you lock us out now, Kiara will find out the truth. She will leave me. It will destroy everything." I looked at him with absolute indifference. "You have exactly 5 minutes to leave these premises before I instruct my security team to physically remove you for trespassing. You are not on the lease, Trevor. You do not own this property. You do not live here anymore. Get out." Trevor stared at me, his chest heaving as he realized there was no negotiation. I was a brick wall. He looked at the contractor who had stepped forward, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. Trevor swallowed hard, spun around and scrambled back into the private elevator completely empty-handed. The doors shut, securing his exit from my home. By noon, the installation was flawless. I pressed my thumb against the sleek black glass of the new biometric scanner. The system beeped a pleasant tone, and the LED indicator flashed a solid glowing green. The heavy oak doors locked with a resounding heavy click that echoed satisfyingly through the empty hallway. Following my strict instructions, the contractors scrubbed the entire digital database for the building garage. Calvin and Trevor no longer had access to their reserved VIP bays. Finally, the team plugged into the building mainframe and wiped the security chips inside the elevator fobs my family carried. If their biometric signature was not in my private database, the elevator would not even budge from the ground floor. I left the building through the service exit and drove back to my downtown office. The afternoon sky was growing dark as the winter storm intensified. Snow was falling heavily now, blanketing the city in freezing white, exactly the kind of weather you do not want to be standing outside in. I unlocked my executive suite and took off my coat, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. I walked over to my large mahogany desk and booted up my dual high-definition monitors. I routed the secure live feeds directly from the newly installed camera systems at the penthouse. Monitor 1 displayed the crisp, wide-angle view of the underground parking garage entrance. Monitor 2 was split down the middle, showing the gleaming marble of the main lobby and a close-up of the private elevator bank. Everything was crystal clear. I walked over to my office bar cart and poured myself a generous glass of rich red wine. I took a slow sip, savoring the complex flavors as I sat back in my leather chair. My family wanted an elite, flawless aesthetic. They wanted to protect their precious image from the embarrassment of a daughter who actually worked for a living. I was simply honoring their wishes by making sure their environment was as secure and exclusive as possible. The trap was fully armed. Now all I had to do was wait for Christmas Eve. The morning of December 23rd arrived with a biting frost that settled over the city skyline. I woke up and immediately opened the shared family calendar app on my phone. Kiara was incredibly diligent about logging her luxury appointments mostly so she could ensure everyone in her social orbit knew exactly how pampered she was. Today her schedule was blocked out entirely in a vibrant shade of pink. Trevor had booked her my mother Yvonne and my father Calvin for an all-day VIP retreat at the Grand Hotel Spa. It was the perfect decoy. Trevor was running on fumes and fumes do not pay for hot stone massages or 24-karat gold facials. I knew for a fact he had charged that entire spa package to a high-interest credit card that was one swipe away from being declined just to get them out of the penthouse. He needed the space to scramble to make frantic calls to hard money lenders, trying to maintain the illusion that he was a Wall Street titan instead of a desperate fraud. I sat in my parked Range Rover across the street from the luxury high-rise watching the underground garage exit. Right at 9 o'clock, Calvin drove his pristine luxury SUV up the ramp. I could see the silhouettes of my mother and sister in the back seat, undoubtedly already sipping sparkling water and complaining about the holiday traffic. 20 minutes later, Trevor's sports car sped out of the garage. He was likely heading to a discreet coffee shop to beg his remaining investors for a lifeline. The second his taillights vanished from my line of sight, I picked up my phone and gave the signal. My private security team arrived in two unmarked transit vans pulling into the loading dock. We bypassed the grand lobby, taking the freight elevator straight to the top floor. Using the master digital override codes I held as the legal property owner, I unlocked the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse and stepped inside. The space smelled strongly of my mother's signature floral perfume and expensive burning candles. I walked slowly across the imported Italian marble floors, letting my eyes wander over the 5,000 square feet of curated perfection. The velvet sofas, the crystal chandeliers, the modern art pieces hanging on the walls. Yvonne had designed this entire space to project an image of untouchable generational wealth. But standing there looking at the luxury they flaunted in my face, I felt nothing but cold clarity. All of this was built on my silent charity and Trevor's mountain of lies. I trailed my hand over the back of a custom-tufted chair. I traced the edge of the imported dining table. Trevor had bought all of this on borrowed money, furnishing a property he did not own all to convince my parents he was royalty. And my parents ate it up. They worshipped the ground. This white finance bro walked on, treating his mediocre failing career as the pinnacle of success, while dismissing my multi-million-dollar property firm as a neighborhood hustle. They allowed him to disrespect me and my own property. Now the bill was coming due. The head of my security team, a towering man named David, stepped up beside me, holding a heavy-duty commercial drill. "Do you want us to start packing their personal items, Ms. Jasmine?" "No," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vaulted room. "Do not touch a single designer bag. Leave Kiara's diamond jewelry exactly where it is in her vanity. Leave my father's imported cigars on the wet bar. I do not want to move them out. I want to lock them out. I want them to look through the glass vestibule doors and see the entire life they thought they owned sitting just out of reach." David nodded, gesturing to his crew. The quiet morning was instantly shattered by the loud screech of power drills. Sparks flew as my team systematically bored out the old locking cylinders on the main entrance doors. They stripped the internal wiring, preparing to mount the heavy military-grade biometric panels. I watched them completely sever the old system from the building mainframe. Following my strict instructions, the contractors scrubbed the entire digital database for the building garage. Calvin and Trevor no longer had access to their reserved VIP bays. Finally, the team plugged into the elevator relay and wiped the security chips inside the fobs my family carried. If a biometric signature was not registered directly to my personal device, the elevator would not even budge from the ground floor. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the winter snow begin to fall over the city streets below. My family wanted an elite, flawless aesthetic. They wanted to protect their precious image from the embarrassment of a daughter who actually worked for a living. I was simply honoring their wishes by making sure their environment was as secure and exclusive as possible. Suddenly, the soft, distinct chime of the private elevator echoed down the hallway. The digital numbers above the metallic doors began ticking upward. Someone had keyed in from the garage using a temporary management code. David paused, lowering his drill. The sudden silence in the penthouse was thick with tension. I held up my hand, signaling the crew to wait. The polished silver doors slid open. Trevor stepped out into the private vestibule, patting the pockets of his cashmere coat and muttering to himself about a forgotten luxury watch. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes darted from the sparks settling on the marble floor to the burly contractors holding power tools, and finally to me standing calmly in the center of the foyer. "What is the meaning of this?" Trevor shouted. He marched out of the elevator, adjusting his expensive cashmere coat, trying to project the authority of a Wall Street tycoon. He pointed a trembling finger at David, who was holding a heavy-duty commercial drill. "I demand to know who gave you authorization to vandalize my front door." I stepped out from the shadow of the hallway, crossing my arms. "I did, Trevor," I said calmly. He scoffed, looking me up and down. "Jasmine, what are you doing here? Did your little property flipping hustle get contracted to do maintenance in my building? I want you and your crew out of my penthouse right now before I call the building manager." I did not raise my voice. I walked over to the imported glass console table, the one Yvonne spent $10,000 on, and reached into my designer tote bag. I pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it onto the glass surface. The heavy thud echoed over the sound of the power tools. "I highly suggest you check your tone, Trevor," I said. "And I suggest you look inside that folder before you embarrass yourself in front of my security team." Trevor marched over, his face flushed with manufactured outrage. He ripped open the folder. I watched his eyes scan the top document. It was the official rent ledger from my holding company. It showed 6 consecutive months of missed payments totaling over $100,000. Right beneath that ledger was a certified copy of the property deed. My signature sat boldly at the bottom line, confirming me as the sole legal owner of the penthouse. The color drained from Trevor's face so fast he looked physically ill. The arrogant smirk vanished completely. The cashmere coat suddenly looked ridiculously oversized on his shrinking frame. He dropped the papers back onto the glass table as if they had burned his fingers. "Jasmine," he stammered, the fake finance bro confidence completely gone from his voice. "Jasmine, please, you cannot do this." I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Cannot do what, Trevor?" "Secure my own property against a squatter who is half a year behind on rent." He looked around nervously, terrified that Kiara or my mother might magically appear from the hallway. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a desperate whisper. "Come on, we are family. You know the market has been tough. I just need a little more time to liquidate some assets. I have a massive deal closing in January. I swear I will pay you back every single cent with interest." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You have not closed a deal in 2 years, Trevor. Your hedge fund went bankrupt. You are drowning in high-interest debt, and you have been using my silence to keep your wife and my parents comfortable. But yesterday, you stood in my foyer and told me I was not cut out for the penthouse lifestyle. You watched my mother disinvite me from Christmas to protect your elite aesthetic. You bit the only hand keeping a roof over your head." He held his hands up in a pleading gesture, his eyes wide with pure panic. "Please, Jasmine, I am begging you. Do not do this right now. The Christmas Eve gala is tomorrow. Your mother invited the entire church board. My remaining investors are coming. If you lock us out now, Kiara will find out the truth. She will leave me. It will destroy my entire life." I looked at him with absolute indifference. I felt no pity for a man who had gladly participated in my emotional abuse just 24 hours ago. "You have exactly 60 seconds to get back in that elevator, Trevor." What he asked, his voice cracking. 60 seconds, I repeated, looking at my watch. "If you are still standing in my foyer when that minute is up, I will have my security team physically restrain you, and I will call the police to escort you out in handcuffs for trespassing." Trevor looked at me, then looked at David, who had stepped forward, crossing his massive arms over his chest. Trevor swallowed hard. He did not say another word. He spun around on his heel and practically dove back into the private elevator. He mashed the button with a shaking finger, and the silver doors slid shut, sealing his exit. I turned back to David. "Finish it." The installation took less than 2 hours, but the results were impenetrable. The heavy oak double doors were now secured by a sleek military-grade biometric scanner. I pressed my thumb against the black glass. The system chimed a pleasant tone and the indicator flashed a solid glowing green. The heavy steel deadbolt slid into place with a resounding mechanical thud that echoed down the empty hallway. My fingerprint was the only key that would ever open that door again. Next, we moved to the building's central server room located in the basement. Following my strict instructions, the security technicians scrubbed the entire digital database for the underground garage. Calvin and Trevor no longer had access to their reserved VIP bays. Their expensive key fobs were rendered completely useless. If they tried to pull their luxury vehicles up to the gate, they would bounce right off the sensor like any other stranger off the street. Finally, we tackled the private elevator system. The technicians plugged their laptops directly into the elevator relay board. They wiped the radio frequency identification chips inside the access cards my family carried. Without my specific digital authorization, the elevator car would not even recognize that the penthouse floor existed. It was completely locked out, isolated from the rest of the building. The lockdown was flawless. I thanked my security team and left through the service exit, pulling my tailored winter coat tight against the biting wind. I drove my vehicle through the sleet-covered streets, navigating the busy downtown holiday traffic. The city was rushing around buying last-minute gifts and preparing for warm family dinners. I felt a profound sense of peace settling over me. I arrived at my corporate office building and took the elevator up to my executive suite. The floor was quiet since I had given my staff an early holiday break. I walked into my corner office and dropped my bag on the leather sofa. The room was dark except for the ambient light spilling in from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snowy skyline. I walked over to my large mahogany desk and booted up my dual high-definition monitors. I routed the secure live feeds directly from the newly installed camera systems at the penthouse. Monitor 1 displayed the crisp, wide-angle view of the underground parking garage entrance. Monitor 2 was split down the middle, showing the gleaming marble of the main lobby and a close-up of the private elevator bank. Every angle was covered in crystal-clear resolution. I walked over to my office wet bar and picked up a bottle of rich, expensive red wine. I poured myself a generous glass, savoring the sound of the liquid filling the crystal goblet. I walked back to my desk and sat down in my plush leather chair. I took a slow sip, letting the complex flavors coat my tongue as my eyes locked onto the glowing screens. My family wanted an elite, flawless aesthetic for their holiday party. They wanted to protect their precious image from the embarrassment of a daughter who actually worked for a living. I was simply honoring their wishes by making sure their environment was as secure and exclusive as possible. The trap was fully armed. Now all I had to do was wait for Christmas Eve. December 24th arrived with a brutal and unrelenting winter storm. At exactly 6 in the evening, I sat at my large mahogany desk, watching the snow whip violently past my office windows. The city was rapidly burying itself under inches of freezing white slush, stalling traffic and sending people hurrying for warmth. I turned my attention away from the storm outside and focused entirely on the high-definition dual monitors lighting up my dark office. The trap was set and the first actors were taking their marks on the stage. Monitor 1 displayed the heated concrete ramp leading down to the VIP underground parking garage of the penthouse building. Right on schedule, a massive, pristine black luxury SUV turned the corner and slowly descended the ramp. I recognized my father Calvin behind the wheel immediately. He drove that expensive vehicle with a profound sense of entitlement, demanding that the world yield to his presence. Through the crystal-clear camera feed, I could perfectly see the interior of the front cabin. Calvin was dressed to the nines in a custom-tailored wool suit, looking every bit the proud patriarch ready to host a night of high society networking and church-board elitism. In the passenger seat next to him sat Trevor. Even through the security feed, I could see the sheer panic radiating off my white brother-in-law. Trevor was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand and nervously adjusting his designer scarf. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He had spent the last 36 hours living in pure terror, knowing I had completely locked down the property, but he remained trapped by his own massive ego and lies. He could not tell Calvin that they were locked out of the building without admitting he was completely broke and had not paid rent in half a year. He chose to walk blindly into the execution rather than confess his failure. Calvin pulled the heavy SUV right up to the electronic security gate. He rolled down his window, letting the freezing wind whip into the heated cabin. With an arrogant flick of his wrist, he extended his arm and swiped his black VIP key fob against the digital scanner panel. He expected the heavy iron gate to lift instantly, just as it had every single day for the past 2 years. He expected a smooth entrance into his luxurious life. Instead, the scanner emitted a harsh, flat buzzer sound. The LED light strip flashed a bright, angry red. Access denied. Calvin frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in confusion. He pulled his hand back and inspected the black plastic fob, as if the device itself had somehow insulted him. He leaned out the window and swiped it a second time, pressing it firmly against the glass. The buzzer sounded again, echoing sharply in the concrete tunnel. Another red flash. Calvin muttered something under his breath, his jaw clenching with irritation. He slapped the fob against the reader a third time using excessive force. Red, red, red. I took a slow sip of my wine, leaning back in my leather chair. I absolutely relished the confusion contorting his face. This was a man who firmly believed his mere presence commanded doors to open and people to bow. Being denied an entry to his own supposed kingdom was simply not computing in his brain. Calvin slammed the vehicle into park. He shoved his door open and stepped out into the freezing wind, pulling his expensive suit jacket tight across his chest to block the chill. He marched over to the security pedestal and jabbed his finger violently against the aluminum call button. The audio feed kicked in, automatically streaming the live sound directly through the speakers on my desk. "Open this gate immediately!" Calvin barked, his deep voice booming with manufactured authority. "The scanner is malfunctioning. We have 50 elite guests arriving in less than an hour, and I do not have time to stand out here freezing in a blizzard." A sharp crackle of static followed before the night shift attendant responded. The attendant was a young professional who was following my explicit new security protocols to the exact letter. "I am sorry, sir," the attendant said, his voice incredibly calm and steady over the intercom. "The scanner is not malfunctioning. Your key fob is no longer active in our system." "What do you mean, no longer active?" Calvin shouted, stepping closer to the microphone and gripping the metal pedestal. "Do you know who I am? My son-in-law pays a premium for this VIP garage space. I am hosting the senior church board tonight. Override the system and lift this gate right now before I have your job." The attendant did not waver. "I cannot do that, sir. Your access has been permanently revoked by the owner of the property. I have strict orders from ownership not to let your vehicle into this garage under any circumstances. Please reverse your vehicle and exit the ramp." The words echoed through the concrete tunnel, lingering in the freezing air. Revoked by the owner. Calvin froze. He turned his head slowly and glared through the windshield directly at Trevor. Trevor was practically sinking into the leather passenger seat, looking like a cornered animal waiting for the strike. Calvin marched back to the open car door and leaned his upper body inside the cabin. The sensitive audio microphone caught every single word of their exchange. "What is going on?" Trevor Calvin demanded, his voice dropping into a deadly low register. "Why is the building staff saying the owner revoked our access? You told me you owned this unit." Trevor stammered, waving his hands frantically in the air as he scrambled to build another lie. "It is a glitch, Calvin. I swear it is just a massive system glitch. The building management changed their security software providers this morning, and they messed up the entire tenant registry. They have been having problems all day. I swear I will have my lawyers tear them apart on Monday morning. Just back the car up. We will have to park on the street for tonight. It is just a stupid administrative error. Do not let it ruin the evening." I watched Calvin process the desperate lie. He wanted to believe it because the alternative was far too humiliating to accept. He wanted to desperately believe his wealthy son-in-law was in total control of the situation and that this was just an inconvenience of modern technology. With a disgusted shake of his head, Calvin climbed back into the driver's seat and slammed the door, shutting out the cold. He threw the massive SUV into reverse and backed slowly up the long concrete ramp, forced to retreat in defeat into the brutal blizzard. I switched my monitor view to the exterior street camera. The snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets, turning the downtown sidewalks into treacherous paths of ice. Calvin was forced to park his luxury vehicle 2 full blocks down the street because it was the only open spot available in the crowded holiday rush. The four of them emerged from the warm car, stepping directly into ankle-deep freezing slush. My mother, Yvonne, stepped out of the back seat wearing designer stiletto heels and a floor-length white fur coat. The brutal wind instantly whipped her perfectly styled hair into a chaotic, tangled mess. My sister Kiara climbed out behind her, clutching her luxury handbag tightly to her chest, trying to shield her perfectly made-up face from the biting sleet. They popped the rear trunk and began pulling out an absurd amount of oversized, expensive gifts and massive catered food platters meant to impress their high society guests. Their flawless aesthetic was entirely ruined in a matter of seconds. Yvonne was shouting at her, over the roaring wind, her precious white fur coat quickly becoming soaked and matted with dirty street snow. Calvin was red-faced and breathing heavily, struggling to carry 3 heavy wooden boxes of imported wine, while his expensive leather dress shoes filled to the brim with freezing water. Trevor trudged ahead of them, carrying towering stacks of shopping bags, his head ducked down in absolute shame and terror. Forced to abandon their royal carriage, they dragged their snow-covered gifts and ruined luxury bags down the icy sidewalk. They marched directly toward the main lobby entrance, slipping and sliding in the freezing sludge, completely unaware that an even bigger and more humiliating surprise was waiting for them behind the glass doors. I watched the feed from camera 4 as the heavy glass doors of the grand lobby swung open. The blast of winter wind rushed in, carrying a chaotic flurry of snow and my thoroughly humiliated family. The contrast was absolutely cinematic. The lobby of the building was a masterpiece of modern luxury, featuring warm ambient lighting, towering marble pillars, and a massive crystal chandelier that cast a golden glow over pristine white rugs. Into this sanctuary of wealth stumbled 4 people looking like they had just survived a shipwreck. Yvonne led the charge, her precious white fur coat completely ruined. The expensive pelt was matted with dirty street slush and dripping freezing water all over the imported marble floor. She was furiously trying to smooth down her hair, which the blizzard had whipped into a tangled, damp mess. She practically threw her designer shopping bags onto a velvet lounge chair, not caring that the wet bottoms were soaking into the expensive upholstery. Through the audio feed, I could hear her sharp, high-pitched complaints echoing through the quiet lobby. She was screaming about the absolute indignity of walking 2 blocks in designer heels. She shot a venomous glare at Trevor, demanding to know why a building he supposedly paid millions to live in would treat its most elite residents like common street vagrants. Behind her, Calvin staggered through the doors, his face dangerously red from the exertion of carrying 3 heavy wooden crates of imported wine through a blizzard. His custom-tailored suit was soaked through at the shoulders, and his luxury leather shoes squeaked loudly with every step, leaving a trail of dirty gray puddles behind him. Kiara was right on his heels, sobbing dramatically about her ruined makeup and her frozen fingers. She was clutching her luxury handbag as if someone in this highly secured billionaire enclave was going to jump out from behind a marble pillar and steal it. And then there was Trevor. He lagged behind the group, dragging a massive catering box, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Even through the security feed, I could see the sheer terror in his eyes. He knew. He knew exactly why the garage gate had not opened, and he knew exactly what was going to happen next, but he was in far too deep to confess. He kept wiping his face, pretending it was melted snow, but I knew it was pure cold sweat. Yvonne snapped her fingers, pointing sharply toward the private elevator bank, tucked away in an exclusive alcove off the main lobby. She ordered Trevor to hurry up and get the doors open before any of their high society neighbors saw them in this pathetic state. Calvin dumped the wine crates onto a glass table with a heavy thud, breathing hard and barking at Trevor to stop lingering like a fool. Trevor shuffled forward, pulling his gold-trimmed VIP access card from his wallet. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped the plastic card onto the floor. I leaned forward in my leather office chair, bringing my wine glass to my lips and maximizing the camera feed covering the elevator bank. Trevor stepped up to the sleek black reader mounted next to the polished silver doors. He took a deep breath, squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second, and swiped the card. A harsh, flat buzzer sounded. The LED light flashed a solid, angry red. Access denied. Trevor let out a shaky breath, pretending to be confused. He flipped the card over and swiped it again. Red. He swiped it a third time, dragging the magnetic strip aggressively through the slot. Red. 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 Yvonne let out an exasperated sigh, throwing her hands up in the air. She loudly questioned if Trevor was incapable of performing even the simplest tasks today. Calvin demanded to know what the holdup was, reminding him that their VIP guests were going to arrive in less than 30 minutes. Kiara pushed past her husband, rolling her eyes with extreme dramatic flair. She muttered something about Trevor always being incompetent with technology when he was stressed. She yanked her own matching VIP card from her designer purse. "Move out of the way." "Trevor," she snapped, stepping up to the panel. "Watch how it is done." She swiped her card with a confident flick of her wrist, fully expecting the heavy silver doors to part for her. The buzzer sounded again. The light flashed red. Kiara froze. The arrogant smirk instantly wiped from her face. She swiped it again, faster this time. Red. She started aggressively slapping the card against the scanner, hitting the button panel with the palm of her hand. Red. 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 The realization that she was locked out of her own castle was finally starting to pierce through her thick layer of entitlement. She turned to Trevor, her voice rising in panic, demanding to know why her card was malfunctioning. Trevor stammered out a pathetic lie about the winter storm causing a temporary blackout in the building's security grid. Yvonne had reached her absolute limit. She was not going to stand in a public lobby dripping wet while her daughter and son-in-law played technical support with an elevator panel. She spun around on her ruined stiletto heels and marched directly toward the main concierge desk. The concierge on duty was a seasoned professional named Julian. He stood perfectly straight behind the polished marble desk, watching the chaotic scene unfold with quiet, detached professionalism. Yvonne slammed her hand flat against the marble desk, leaning over it to invade his personal space. She snapped her fingers right in front of his face, an old habit she used whenever she felt superior to service workers. "Listen to me very carefully," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Our private elevator is malfunctioning. We have 50 of the most important people in this city arriving at this building in exactly 25 minutes. I want you to log into your little computer, override the system, and open those doors for us right this second. Do you understand who we are? My son-in-law pays your salary." Julian did not flinch. He did not apologize. He looked down at his dual monitor system, typing a few keystrokes into the building registry. I watched his face on my screen, knowing exactly what information was popping up on his end. He looked back up at Yvonne, maintaining flawless eye contact. "I am sorry, ma'am," Julian said, his voice projecting clearly across the entire lobby. "I cannot override the system for you." Calvin stormed over, joining his wife at the desk. He slammed his fist down next to hers, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate the concierge. "What do you mean you cannot override it?" Calvin bellowed. "This is unacceptable. Get your building manager on the phone right now. I will have you fired and blacklisted from working in this city ever again. Open the damn elevator." Julian stood his ground. He looked directly at Calvin, then shifted his gaze to Trevor, who was hiding behind the rest of the family, looking like he might actually pass out from the sheer terror of the moment. Julian looked back at his screen, confirming the explicit instructions I had left on the account. He squared his shoulders, looking Yvonne dead in the eye. "Ma'am, the true property owner has locked the premises and removed you from the registry." Just as he says this, the lobby doors slide open. The heavy glass lobby doors parted with a soft, pneumatic hiss, letting in a brutal gust of freezing wind and a crowd of people who expected a night of unmatched luxury. I leaned closer to my monitor, watching the scene unfold in glorious high definition. Leading the pack was Reverend Wallace, dressed in a tailored charcoal overcoat, alongside his wife, Sister Beatrice, who was draped in a pristine floor-length mink. Behind them trailed a dozen of the most influential members of my parents' church board, alongside two older white men in expensive cashmere, who I instantly recognized as Trevor's last remaining desperate investors. They stomped the snow off their designer boots, shaking their umbrellas and looking toward the elevator bank, expecting to be whisked up to a sprawling penthouse gala. Instead, they found my family. The contrast was devastatingly cinematic. The elite guests stopped dead in their tracks, their polite holiday smiles freezing on their faces. They stared at Yvonne, who was standing at the concierge desk, looking like she had just been dragged through a city gutter. Her white fur coat was soaked gray at the hem, her hair was plastered to her forehead, and she was surrounded by dripping, soggy shopping bags. Calvin stood next to her, his expensive leather shoes squeaking in a puddle of dirty, melted snow. Kiara was openly weeping, her mascara running down her cheeks, while clutching a ruined designer purse. Trevor was visibly trembling, pinned against the marble pillar, trying to shrink into the background. Yvonne turned around and saw the churchboard staring at her. I watched her entire body stiffen. The carefully constructed facade of the flawless, affluent matriarch cracked right down the middle. She immediately plastered on a bright, manicured smile and took a step toward Reverend Wallace, waving her hands in a desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Reverend Wallace," she called out, her voice tight and unnaturally high. "Welcome. We are so glad you made it through the storm. We are just experiencing a tiny technical glitch with the new building security system. You know how these modern upgrades are always causing unnecessary headaches. Trevor will have it sorted out in just a moment." Sister Beatrice looked Yvonne up and down, taking in the ruined hair and the freezing wet clothes. Her eyes darted to the chaotic pile of soggy catered food platters abandoned on the lobby chairs. "A glitch, sister?" Beatrice asked, her tone dripping with that specific brand of polite church lady judgment. "Yvonne, you look like you walked here from the highway. Why are your bags soaking wet?" Yvonne stammered, her hands fluttering nervously. "Oh, the garage gate was just acting up. We decided to enjoy the brisk winter air for a block or two. It is absolutely nothing to worry about." Before Yvonne could spin another lie, one of Trevor's investors stepped forward. He was a wealthy, severe-looking man named Sterling. He ignored my mother completely and marched directly up to Trevor. Sterling did not care about social graces or church board aesthetics. He cared about his money. "Trevor, what kind of amateur operation are you running here?" Sterling demanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I flew in from Chicago in a blizzard because you promised me a high-level networking event and a portfolio review in your penthouse. Now I am standing in a freezing lobby while your wife is crying and you are hiding behind a pillar. Get us upstairs right now." Trevor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Calvin, begging for intervention, but my father was completely paralyzed. Calvin was a man who ruled by intimidation, but he could not bully his way out of this in front of the very people he spent decades trying to impress. Calvin shrank back, his broad shoulders slumping as the reality of his powerlessness set in. Julian, the concierge, did not miss a beat. He stood perfectly upright behind his marble desk, fulfilling his duties with absolute neutrality. He looked directly at Reverend Wallace and the investors, projecting his voice clearly across the silent lobby. "I apologize for the inconvenience, gentlemen," Julian said. "But there is no technical glitch. The true owner of the penthouse has locked down the property and permanently revoked access for these individuals. They have been removed from the building registry. They are not permitted past this lobby." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that sucks the oxygen right out of a room. Sister Beatrice gasped, pressing a gloved hand to her chest. Reverend Wallace took a slow, deliberate step back away from Calvin, as if financial ruin were a contagious disease. Sterling turned his piercing gaze from Julian back to Trevor, his eyes narrowing with lethal realization. "You do not own the penthouse?" Sterling asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Trevor backed into the marble pillar, sweating through his designer coat. "I can explain," he choked out. "It is just a temporary asset reallocation. I am restructuring my holdings." "You are a fraud," Sterling spat. He turned his back on Trevor, instantly dismissing his existence. Sterling signaled to his associate, and without another word, the two investors walked straight back out the glass doors into the blizzard, leaving Trevor completely ruined. The departure of the investors was the final nail in the coffin. Yvonne watched them leave, her chest heaving with panic. She spun around to face Calvin, her eyes wild with desperation. "Calvin, do something," she hissed. "Call the building manager. Call the police. Call somebody. We are being humiliated." Calvin pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. Kiara dropped her ruined luxury bag onto the wet floor and grabbed Trevor by the lapels of his coat, shaking him. "You told me you owned this," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing. "You told me we were fine. Who owns the penthouse, Trevor? Who locked us out?" Trevor squeezed his eyes shut, unable to look his wife in the face. He knew exactly who held the deed. He knew exactly who was watching them, but he was too terrified to say my name. Sitting in the quiet warmth of my downtown office, I watched the glorious chaos unfold on my high-definition screens. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my rich red wine, savoring the complex dark fruit notes as the heat bloomed in my chest. I had spent my entire life being pushed aside, told I was too plain, too ordinary, too much of a failure to sit at their table. Now they were standing in a puddle of dirty street water, begging for a seat at mine. On screen. Yvonne realized that screaming at the concierge was getting her nowhere. She whipped her smartphone out of her designer purse, her thumbs flying across the screen. A second later, my personal cell phone lit up on my desk. The screen flashed bright white in the dim office, illuminating the caller ID. "Yvonne." I did not move. I just watched the screen light up and fade to black. A moment later, it lit up again. "Yvonne." I looked at the lobby monitor. My mother was pacing frantically back and forth near the elevator bank, her pristine image completely shattered in front of the entire church board. Sister Beatrice and Reverend Wallace were whispering to each other, casting pitying, judgmental glances at my parents. The social standing Yvonne had spent 30 years cultivating was burning to the ground in real time, and she knew I was the only person with a fire extinguisher. My phone lit up again. This time the caller ID showed Calvin, then Kiara, then Yvonne again. The device began vibrating relentlessly against the wood of my desk, buzzing like an angry hornet. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, spinning my wine glass by the stem. The security feed showed pure, unadulterated panic. Kiara was openly sobbing against a marble wall, her golden child status, offering her absolutely no protection from reality. Trevor was staring blankly at the floor, a ruined man who had finally run out of lies. Calvin was yelling into his phone, demanding that I answer, barking empty threats into my voicemail box. The missed call notifications piled up on my lock screen. 10 calls, 25 calls, 40 calls. They were relentlessly, desperately trying to reach the daughter they had banished just 24 hours prior. They were calling the woman they had deemed an embarrassment, hoping she would magically fix the consequences of their own arrogance. 60 calls, 80 calls, 90 missed calls. I let the phone buzz. I watched them sweat. I watched them realize that their elite church friends were slowly, awkwardly backing away toward the exit, wanting no part of this embarrassing spectacle. I watched Yvonne drop her phone into her lap, covering her face with her hands as she finally understood that she had absolutely zero control over the situation. On the 91st call, I reached out and picked up the phone. I slid my thumb across the screen, accepting the call. I brought the device to my ear, but I did not say hello. I just listened to the chaotic overlapping sounds of the I did not say hello. I just listened to the chaotic overlapping sounds of the lobby echoing through the receiver. Jasmine, Yvonne shrieked, her voice raw and hysterical. "Jasmine, you need to fix this right now. The building is making a terrible mistake. They locked us out. The concierge is refusing to let us upstairs. Pastor Thomas is standing right here. Call whoever you need to call and get this door open before I lose my mind." I took one final sip of my wine, relishing the absolute power I held in this exact second. I set the crystal glass down on my desk and stared directly into the camera feed, watching my mother press her phone desperately to her ear. "I will be right down," I said. I hung up the phone, grabbed my tailored winter coat, and walked out of my office to deliver the final blow. The drive from my downtown office took exactly 12 minutes. The snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets, but my heated luxury SUV handled the icy roads with ease. I pulled into the loading dock parking space that was permanently reserved under my strict instructions. I took a moment to check my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a flawless, tailored camel hair winter coat over a crisp emerald silk blouse and perfectly fitted trousers. My hair was impeccably styled. I looked like a woman who owned the room because I literally did. I stepped out of the vehicle and the freezing wind whipped around me, but I felt completely warm, radiating a deep internal calm. The moment the heavy glass service doors slid open and I stepped into the grand lobby, the chaotic noise hit me. It sounded like a crowded theater before a disastrous performance. The church board members were huddled near the massive marble fireplace, casting judgmental glances. In our community, social standing within the church is everything. Reverend Wallace and Sister Beatrice were murmuring to each other, their expressions a mix of confusion and sheer disdain. Sister Beatrice clutched her mink coat, looking at my family like they were a cautionary tale. Sterling and the other investors stood rigidly by the front doors, watching the spectacle with predatory calculation. But the second my heels clicked against the pristine marble floor, the energy shifted entirely. The hushed whispers died down. Everyone turned to look at me. The contrast was devastating. They were a miserable, soaking wet mess of ruined designer clothes and melted snow. I was the picture of absolute control. Yvonne spotted me immediately. Her ruined white fur coat was dripping dirty puddle water onto the expensive custom rug. Her usual polished church matriarch mask was completely gone, replaced by frantic, desperate arrogance. She did not see a successful property acquisition CEO standing in front of her. She only saw the scapegoat daughter she assumed had a low-level connection with the building staff. Yvonne marched right up to me, grabbing my forearm with her freezing wet fingers. She leaned in close, trying to whisper yells so the elite guests would not hear her panic. "Jasmine, what are you doing here?" she hissed, spraying a fine mist of saliva. "Did Julian call you? Fix this mess right now. You know the building manager from your little real estate side jobs. Tell them to open our private elevator immediately. Pastor Thomas is standing right there and we are being humiliated in front of our entire congregation. Tell them Trevor pays a premium to live here and this glitch is unacceptable. Do something useful for once in your life and get these doors open." I slowly, deliberately reached down and removed her wet, freezing hand from my cashmere sleeve. I did not break eye contact. I did not raise my voice. "I am doing something useful, Yvonne," I said, my tone perfectly neutral. "I am securing the premises." Yvonne opened her mouth to snap back, but before she could process my words, Trevor inserted himself into the confrontation. He saw Sterling and the other white investors watching his every move. His fragile ego could not handle the public emasculation of being locked out of his own supposed penthouse. He needed a scapegoat, and I was his favorite target. Trevor puffed out his chest, attempting to physically tower over me. He marched past Yvonne and pointed a shaking finger directly in my face. His face was blotchy, his designer coat was soaked, and he reeked of cheap desperation. "Listen to me very carefully, Jasmine," Trevor barked, projecting his voice so every single VIP guest in the lobby could hear him playing the tough guy. "I do not care who you know in the maintenance department. You are going to walk over to that desk and tell your buddy Julian to unlock my elevator. I am the legal tenant of this penthouse. I am a highly respected hedge fund manager in this city. If those doors are not open in exactly 2 minutes, I am going to file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against this entire building for illegal lockout and harassment." Trevor spun around to face the concierge desk, pointing his finger at Julian now. "And you," he yelled, spraying vitriol across the lobby. "You are going to be personally named in that lawsuit. I will make sure you are bankrupt and unemployable. I will own this building by the time my legal team is done with you." Kiara whimpered from the sidelines, clutching her ruined handbag. "Trevor, please just make them open the doors," she cried, her voice shrill and grating. "I am freezing and everyone is staring at us." Calvin stood rigidly near the elevator bank, refusing to meet my eyes. He was a man who ruled his household through intimidation, but in this lobby, surrounded by real wealth and real power, he was completely impotent. He let his white son-in-law scream at the staff and threaten his own daughter because Calvin had outsourced his entire sense of superiority to Trevor. They had all hitched their wagon to a man who was running on fumes and lies. Calvin cared more about the proximity to Trevor's financial status than he cared about protecting his own flesh and blood. The lobby was dead silent. Even the storm outside seemed to quiet down. Every eye was on Trevor, throwing his desperate tantrum, and then every eye shifted back to me. They were waiting for me to cower, to apologize, to scurry over to the concierge desk and beg for a favor. They were waiting for the family failure to clean up the mess and restore their fragile egos. I did not flinch. I did not back away from his pointing finger. I maintained my perfectly composed posture, letting the silence stretch out until it became suffocating. The absolute stillness of my reaction made Trevor falter. His breathing grew shallow and the fake bravado began to crack, exposing the raw terror underneath. He knew I was too calm. He knew something was terribly wrong, but his arrogance would not let him back down in front of his investors. He needed to prove he was the master of his domain. I reached into my designer leather tote bag, and my hand wrapped around the thick manila folder I had prepared. I slowly pulled it out, the heavy paper stock making a soft scraping sound against the leather. I held the folder in my hand, tapping it gently against my palm in a slow, rhythmic motion. I looked at Trevor, watching him realize that his entire life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. "You cannot sue my building, Trevor, but I can certainly sue you for back rent." I finished, my voice carrying a lethal calm that cut straight through the thick tension of the lobby. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The heavy manila folder in my hand feels like a loaded weapon. I raise my arm and let it drop flat onto the center of the massive glass coffee table situated between the velvet lounge chairs. The sharp smack echoes off the marble walls, silencing the remaining murmurs of the elite guests. The momentum causes the thick stack of papers to slide out, fanning perfectly across the transparent surface for everyone to see. I do not point. I do not shout. I just let the documents speak. The top page features a glaring red seal from the Federal Bankruptcy Court. It is Trevor's Chapter 7 liquidation filed exactly 24 months ago. Right beneath it lies the original bank foreclosure notice for the penthouse addressed to Trevor, detailing months of severe financial delinquency. And resting beautifully at the very center of the table is the certified property deed. The heavy legal parchment clearly displays my holding company as the sole purchaser, with my signature notarized in thick black ink. I keep my eyes locked on Trevor, but I project my voice so that it bounces off the high ceilings, ensuring every single member of the church board and every wealthy investor catches every syllable. "You want to file a lawsuit, Trevor?" I ask, tilting my head. "You want to drag your non-existent legal team into a courtroom to demand access to a $10 million property that you do not own and have not paid a single dime toward in over half a year." Trevor opens his mouth, his face rapidly draining of all color, turning a sickly chalk white. No sound comes out. His lips move soundlessly like a fish suffocating on dry land. I turn my gaze toward my mother and father, who are staring at the table as if the papers are covered in poison. 2 years ago, I announced taking a slow, deliberate step around the glass table, so they are forced to look at me. 2 years ago, Trevor's boutique hedge fund collapsed. He lost absolutely everything. The bank was hours away from changing the locks and putting you all out on the street. To save this family from the exact public humiliation you are experiencing right now, I stepped in. I bought the penthouse in cash through a blind trust. I allowed Trevor to sign a lease with my company so he could preserve his fragile ego and maintain the grand illusion that he was your wealthy savior. The lobby goes dead silent. Reverend Wallace stops breathing, his hand frozen halfway to adjusting his collar. Sister Beatrice lowers her mink coat, her eyes darting from the bankruptcy papers to Yvonne's ruined wet hair. I continue, relentless and completely unbothered by the shock radiating around me. "For 24 months, I say, making sure my mother hears the weight of her own hypocrisy. For 24 months, the daughter you called a failure, the daughter you deemed unfit to sit at your elite holiday table, has been the only reason you have a roof over your heads. I subsidized your luxury. I paid for your precious aesthetic. Meanwhile, your golden son-in-law has been taking all the credit while draining his remaining high-interest credit cards to buy Kiara tennis bracelets and book fake spa days, just to keep you all out of the house while he dodged aggressive debt collectors. The fallout is instantaneous and brutal. A collective gasp ripples through the well-dressed crowd. The whispers ignite like a wildfire spreading through dry brush. Sister Beatrice leans into another church elder, shaking her head and muttering about how sinful it is to live a life of such deep, dark deception. Two board members, wealthy developers themselves, shake their heads in pure disgust. They do not ask questions. They do not offer sympathies. They turn on their polished heels and march straight back out the sliding glass doors into the freezing blizzard. They simply abandon the sinking ship. The rest of the elite guests slowly begin to follow suit, awkwardly, buttoning their expensive coats and averting their eyes. Yvonne's grand Christmas Eve gala is completely disintegrating right in front of her face. Trevor is entirely paralyzed. The arrogant, commanding posture he carried just moments ago is stripped away. His shoulders slump forward, and he looks physically smaller, devoid of the unearned privilege he wielded like a weapon against me. He tries to reach for the bankruptcy filing, his hand trembling so violently he can barely grip the edge of the paper. "Jasmine, please." He chokes out his voice, a pathetic, reedy whisper. "Do not do this in front of them." But it is too late. Kiara pushes past our father, her ruined designer heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor. She looks down at the table. She reads the bright red foreclosure stamp. She traces the massive amount of debt listed on the federal filings. Her eyes scan the property deed stopping on my name. She looks up at Trevor, her eyes wide with a manic, uncomprehending terror. "Trevor, what is this?" Kiara demands, her voice cracking with rising hysteria. "Tell me this is one of her stupid tricks. Tell me you own the penthouse. Tell them she is lying." Trevor cannot even look his wife in the eye. He stares at the marble floor, his heavy silence providing the loudest confession possible. The reality crashes into Kiara with the force of a moving freight train. The entire foundation of her identity shatters into a million jagged pieces. Her country club status, her endless bragging about marrying into high finance, her lifelong superiority complex over me. It was all funded by the very sister she tormented. The heavy limited edition designer bag slips from her freezing fingers, hitting the hard floor with a dull thud. She lets out a sound that is half scream and half sob. It is a hysterical, guttural wail. She covers her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The pristine golden child completely breaks down in the middle of a public lobby, mourning the death of her fake reality. Calvin does not move to comfort his crying daughter. He does not yell at Trevor. My father, a man who measures human worth entirely by net worth and financial dominance, stands completely frozen. He stares down at the certified property deed. He reads my signature. He looks at the purchase price paid in full in cash without a single loan. His jaw slackens. The realization that the daughter he banished to the background, the one he dismissed as a small-time hustler, actually possesses the kind of immense quiet power he has spent his entire life pretending to have strikes him absolutely speechless. He slowly lifts his head and looks up at me, his eyes wide and completely devoid of their usual commanding fire. For the first time in my 33 years of life, my father looks at me and sees someone he cannot intimidate, cannot control, and cannot surpass. He opens his mouth to speak, to try and salvage some shred of his patriarchal authority, but the words die in his throat. He is looking at the new owner of his entire life. The heavy glass revolving doors slowly glided to a complete halt, sealing out the brutal howling of the winter blizzard. The sudden quiet in the grand lobby was absolute and suffocating. The elite church board members, the wealthy developers, and the high society investors were completely gone, taking my parents' entire social reputation with them into the freezing night. The pristine marble floor was now a disaster zone covered in dirty melted snow, abandoned wet shopping bags, and the shattered remnants of my family false reality. I stood in the center of the lobby, my tailored camel hair coat perfectly dry, my posture completely relaxed. I looked down at the glass coffee table where the foreclosure notices and bankruptcy filings still rested next to my certified property deed. Kiara was a crumpled mess on the floor. She had dropped to her knees, her ruined designer coat pooling around her in a soggy heap. She was clutching the bankruptcy filing in her trembling hands, her manicured nails digging into the red federal stamp. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air, as her eyes darted wildly across the page, trying to find some loophole, some indication that this was all a massive prank. Her entire identity, her superiority complex, her endless bragging about her lavish lifestyle, was evaporating right in front of her face. Yvonne stood completely frozen, staring at the empty space where Reverend Wallace and Sister Beatrice had just been standing. I could practically see the gears grinding in her head as her brain short-circuited. The flawless, affluent matriarch image she had spent 30 years painstakingly cultivating at the church had just been burned to the ground in less than 5 minutes. She had no audience left to impress. She had no social capital left to wield. She was standing in a puddle of dirty water staring at the daughter she had thrown away. Then the pivot happened. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Yvonne's shoulders suddenly slumped. Her face contorted, dropping the arrogant sneer and replacing it with a mask of absolute devastation. She forced tears into her eyes, letting them spill over her ruined mascara. She took a shaky step toward me, her hands outstretched, palms facing upward in a gesture of pure surrender. "Jasmine, my baby," Yvonne cried, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. "Jasmine, what are you doing? We are blood. How could you humiliate your family like this? You are being so cruel to us." She took another step, reaching out to grab my hands. She wanted to pull me into her manufactured grief to make me feel responsible for the wreckage she had caused. I took a sharp, deliberate step back, physically rejecting her touch. My sudden movement caused her hands to drop awkwardly to her sides. "Do not try to touch me, Yvonne," I said, my voice slicing through the lobby like a freshly sharpened blade. "And do not dare cry those fake tears. You are not crying because you are heartbroken. You are crying because you got caught. You are crying because Sister Beatrice just watched your entire fake life collapse and you know she's going to tell every single person in the congregation by tomorrow morning." Yvonne recoiled as if I had struck her. Her face flushed a deep, angry red beneath the tear streaks. "Jasmine, that is not true," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "I am your mother. I have always loved you. I have always wanted the best for you. We were just trying to protect you yesterday. We did not want you to feel out of place among Trevor investors. We were trying to save you from being uncomfortable." I let out a short, humorless laugh. It was astounding how quickly she could twist reality to frame her cruelty as an act of maternal protection. "You were not protecting me," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You were hiding me. Family does not discard you when you do not fit an aesthetic. You did not want me at Christmas because I embarrassed you. You looked at a daughter who built a multi-million-dollar property acquisitions firm from the ground up, and you called me a failure because my success did not look like the flashy country club fantasy you wanted to project." Calvin finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. His patriarchal pride could not handle watching a woman, particularly the daughter he deemed inferior, dictate the terms of reality. He stepped in front of Yvonne, puffing out his chest and pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You will not speak to your mother that way," Calvin bellowed, his deep voice echoing off the marble pillars. "I do not care what pieces of paper you slapped on that table. I am your father and I demand respect. You are going to pick up those documents, you are going to tell the concierge to unlock our elevator, and we are going to go upstairs and handle this private family matter behind closed doors like civilized people." I did not flinch. I did not back away from his pointing finger. I simply looked at it, then looked up into his furious, desperate eyes. "Respect is earned, Calvin," I stated, my voice dropping into a deadly calm register. "You lost mine the second you stood in my foyer and let a broke fraud disrespect me in my own house. You demand respect from me now, but where was your authority yesterday when Trevor told me I was not cut out for the penthouse lifestyle? Where was your patriarchal protection when your wife kicked me out into the freezing rain? You stood there silently. Because you wanted Wall Street wealth so badly, you happily sold out your own flesh and blood to keep a front." Calvin's jaw clenched tight. The veins in his neck bulged as he struggled to find a comeback, but he had absolutely no ammunition. I had stripped away his financial superiority, leaving him with nothing but empty demands. "You chose a fake finance bro over your own daughter." I continued, stepping closer to him, forcing him to hold my gaze. "You were so obsessed with having the wealthy white son-in-law as a trophy to parade around your golf buddies that you never even bothered to look into his actual accounts. You let him parade around in a luxury coat funded by maximum limit credit cards, and you worshipped the ground he walked on. Meanwhile, the daughter you banished has been the only thing standing between you and a homeless shelter for 24 months. Kiara let out a ragged gasp from the floor. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the bankruptcy filing so tightly the paper was tearing at the edges. She stumbled over to Trevor, grabbing the lapels of his soaked designer coat. "Is it true?" Kiara screamed, her voice raw and hysterical. "Tell me she is lying, Trevor. Tell me you own our house. Tell me you have money. You told me the market was just slow. You told me we were rich." Trevor could not even look his wife in the face. He stared at the marble floor, his shoulders completely slumped his face, a portrait of absolute pathetic defeat. I am sorry, Kiara. He mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. I tried to fix it. I thought the next deal would close. I just needed more time. You lied to me, Kiara shrieked, slamming her fists against his chest. I have been bragging to my friends. I have been posting about our investments. I have nothing. You left me with nothing. Yvonne rushed over, trying to pull Kiara away from Trevor. Stop it, Kiara! Yvonne hissed desperately, glancing around the lobby to see if Julian, the concierge, was listening. Stop making a scene. We will fix this. We will figure it out. Yvonne turned back to me, her tone shifting again. This time she tried bargaining. She tried to approach me as a business partner, hoping my professional logic would override my personal vengeance. Fine, Jasmine, Yvonne said, smoothing down the front of her ruined silk dress. You own the property. You made your point. You proved you are successful. We are very proud of you. Now let us go upstairs. We will draw up a formal lease agreement. Your father and I will pay you rent directly. We will keep this strictly between us. No one else has to know the details. We can still salvage Christmas. I stared at her in sheer disbelief. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her own arrogance, she thought she could negotiate her way back into a luxury lifestyle. She thought a simple fake compliment would buy her access to my assets. There is no negotiation, Yvonne, I said, my voice ringing with finality. You do not get to call me a failure on Monday and ask to sign a lease on Tuesday. You do not get to banish me from Christmas dinner and then beg me to host you in the very property you kicked me out of. You wanted me out of your elite circle, so congratulations. I am officially removing myself and my real estate portfolio from your life. Calvin's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. You cannot do this, he roared, taking a threatening step toward me. We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us. I owe you absolutely nothing. I fired back, matching his volume. I paid my debt the day I bought this penthouse to save you from social ruin. I gave you 2 years of grace to figure your lives out, and you used that time to belittle me. My charity has officially run dry. The lobby fell silent again, save for Kiara muffled sobbing. The absolute reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They had no home. They had no money. They had no social standing left to leverage. They were entirely at the mercy of the woman they had spent their entire lives trying to destroy. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a sudden frantic movement. While Yvonne was trying to bargain and Calvin was trying to intimidate, Trevor had quietly detached himself from Kiara's grip. He was sliding along the far perimeter of the lobby, using the massive marble pillars to block my line of sight. The absolute coward was trying to abandon his weeping wife and his ruined in-laws. I was inching his wet, squeaking shoes toward the automatic glass doors, desperately trying to vanish into the freezing blizzard before the true legal and financial consequences of his actions could crash down on his head. He wanted to run away and leave Kiara holding the bag for the lifestyle he had faked. I turned my head, locking my eyes onto his retreating figure. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold lobby air, and let my voice crack like a whip across the marble room. Stop right there, Trevor. You do not live here anymore. Trevor froze mid-step, his wet designer shoes letting out a pathetic squeak against the marble floor. He had almost made it to the revolving glass doors, desperately hoping to slip out into the freezing blizzard and disappear into the night, leaving my family to deal with the catastrophic wreckage he had created. But the sound of my voice rooted him to the spot. He slowly turned around. His shoulders hunched, his face pale and completely devoid of the arrogant finance bro persona he had worn like a shield just 24 hours ago. You cannot leave me with nothing. Jasmine, he pleaded, his voice cracking as he looked at the cold, unyielding expression on my face. My clothes are up there, my laptop, my watches. I need my things. You should have thought about your things 6 months ago when you stopped paying rent. Trevor, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the empty lobby. You do not own a single item in that penthouse anymore. Everything inside those walls is now collateral against the hundreds of thousands of dollars you owe my holding company. You can contact my legal team on Monday to discuss a payment plan, but tonight you leave with exactly what you are wearing. Trevor opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer exhaustion and terror radiating from his eyes stopped him. He looked over at Kiara, who was still sitting on the floor, clutching the bankruptcy filings, sobbing into her hands. He did not make a move to comfort his wife. He did not apologize for lying to her for 2 entire years. He simply lowered his head and took a step back toward the exit. Julian, I called out, not taking my eyes off Trevor. Yes, Miss Jasmine, the concierge responded instantly, standing at absolute attention behind his desk. Trevor is no longer permitted on these premises, I instructed, making sure my voice carried the heavy weight of absolute authority. His name is permanently removed from the building registry. If he steps foot inside this lobby again, or attempts to access the parking garage, you are to call the police immediately and have him arrested for trespassing. Understood, Ms. Jasmine, Julian replied, giving Trevor a stern warning glance. Trevor swallowed hard, pulling his damp cashmere coat tightly around his shivering frame. He looked at Calvin and Yvonne one last time, hoping for some miraculous intervention. But my parents were completely silent too, shell-shocked by their own impending ruin, to defend the man who had caused it. Without another word, Trevor pushed through the heavy glass doors and disappeared into the blinding white snow, forced to find a cheap roadside motel on Christmas Eve. With the primary parasite eliminated, I turned my full attention back to my parents. Calvin was still gripping the edge of the glass coffee table, his knuckles white, his chest heaving as he tried to process the total evaporation of his patriarchal control. Yvonne was standing beside him, shivering in her ruined wet fur coat, her eyes darting nervously between me and the exit, as if she was calculating a way to escape this nightmare. I reached back into my designer leather tote bag. The sound of the thick paper sliding against the leather seemed deafening in the quiet lobby. I pulled out a crisp white legal envelope sealed with a bright red notary stamp. I took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward and held the envelope out directly to my father. Calvin stared at the envelope as if it were a loaded weapon. He hesitated, his jaw clenching tight, but the terrifying reality of the situation forced his hand. He slowly reached out and took the envelope from my grasp, tearing open the seal with trembling fingers. He pulled out the heavy stock paper, unfolding it under the bright lobby lights. I watched his eyes scan the bold legal header printed at the top of the page. Notice to vacate. What is this? Calvin breathed out the words, barely scraping past his throat. You cannot be serious, Jasmine. You are evicting your own parents. I am evicting non-paying tenants who have exhausted my goodwill. I corrected him, my tone stripped of any familial warmth. You have exactly 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my property. I suggest you start looking for a modest apartment tomorrow morning, because by the end of January, my security team will be changing the locks again, and anything left behind will be thrown into a dumpster. Yvonne gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. 30 days, she shrieked, her voice rising in a fresh wave of panic. Jasmine, it is the middle of winter. The holidays are tomorrow. Where are we supposed to go? We have a reputation in this city. We cannot just pack up and move into some cramped little apartment. What will the church board say? What will our friends think? They will think you should have treated your landlord with a little more respect, I replied smoothly, completely unbothered by her distress. Your reputation burned to the ground 20 minutes ago, Yvonne. Sister Beatrice is probably on the phone right now telling the entire congregation that your Wall Street son-in-law is a bankrupt fraud and you are getting kicked out of your own home. You have much bigger problems than your aesthetic right now. Calvin crumpled the eviction notice in his fist, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. He took a threatening step toward me, puffing out his chest in a desperate final attempt to intimidate me into submission. You listen to me, you ungrateful child, he growled. I am not leaving my home. I will hire the best lawyers in the city. I will drag this out in court for years. You will not disrespect me like this. I let out a short, icy laugh that stopped him dead in his tracks. Pay for a lawyer with what? Calvin, I asked, tilting my head and looking at him with pure pity. You do not have a lease. You do not have a deed. You have absolutely no legal right to reside in that penthouse, and we both know you do not have the liquid capital to fight my corporate legal team. You can pack your bags quietly over the next 30 days, or I can have the sheriff drag you out in handcuffs on day 31. The choice is entirely yours. Calvin deflated the last ounce of fight, completely draining from his body. He looked down at the marble floor, finally accepting that he had absolutely zero power over me. There is one more condition, I stated, making sure my voice was crystal clear. While you spend the next 30 days packing up your ruined lives, you will no longer have access to the main lobby, the valet service, or the private elevator. Your biometric signatures have been restricted. From this moment until the day you leave my building, you will enter and exit through the underground loading dock, and you will exclusively use the freight service elevator. Yvonne let out a horrified, choked sob. The freight elevator, she cried out, her voice shaking with absolute revulsion. Jasmine, you cannot make us ride in the service elevator with the garbage bins and the maintenance crew. We are highly respected residents. We cannot be seen walking through the loading dock like common laborers. You are not highly respected residents, Yvonne. I snapped, shutting down her complaints instantly. You are squatters living on my charity. For years you have looked down on service workers, treating them like they were beneath you. You treated me like I was beneath you because I built my wealth through hard work instead of flashy finance scams. So for the next 30 days, you get to experience exactly what it feels like to be treated like the help. You will ride the service elevator, and you will be grateful I am not throwing you out into the snow tonight. Down on the floor. Kiara finally found her voice. She had been sitting in a puddle of melted snow, listening to her entire luxurious life being dismantled piece by piece. Her husband was gone. Her penthouse was gone. Her massive trust fund illusion was gone. She scrambled to her feet, her designer dress soaked and ruined, her face completely smeared with black mascara. She lunged toward me, grabbing the sleeves of my tailored coat with her freezing wet hands. Kiara was not the arrogant golden child anymore. She was a terrified, desperate woman who had zero life skills and no idea how to survive outside of a luxury bubble. Jasmine, please, Kiara sobbed, her voice cracking as she shook my arms. Jasmine, you cannot do this to me. Trevor is gone. I have no money. My credit cards are all under his accounts. I have nowhere to go. Please do not make me ride the freight elevator. Please do not kick me out. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize. Just let me stay here. It is Christmas Eve, Jasmine. Please, you are my sister. I looked down at her frantic, tear-stained face. I looked at her hands gripping my coat, the same hands that had typed out a text message 24 hours ago, demanding I send her $500 for caviar while mocking my lack of gifts. I looked at the sister who had happily participated in my emotional abuse, who had laughed when my mother kicked me out of the penthouse, who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate her own status. I reached down and slowly peeled her trembling fingers off my coat, stepping back so she could not touch me again. I looked at her with an expression of absolute cold finality. You told me to go back to my modest little life, I said, my voice razor-sharp and echoing in the quiet lobby. Take your own advice. I turned my back on the pathetic scene unfolding on the marble floor. I did not offer a final word of comfort or a petty insult, because absolute silence was the most lethal weapon I had left, and I wielded it flawlessly. I walked toward the private elevator bank, my heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic authority against the stone. I pressed my thumb against the sleek glass of the biometric scanner. The system instantly recognized my masterprint and emitted a soft, welcoming ping. The polished silver doors slid open, revealing the warm, illuminated interior of my private carriage. I stepped inside and turned around to face the lobby one last time. Yvonne was clutching her ruined wet coat, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for a way to regain control of a room that was entirely empty of her elite audience. Calvin was staring at the floor, completely broken by the reality of his own powerlessness. Kiara was still sobbing over her soaked designer shopping bags, her mascara-stained face buried in her hands. The heavy silver doors slid shut, cutting off their desperate voices and sealing them out of my world forever. The ride up to the top floor was the quietest, most peaceful minute of my entire life. I stepped into my penthouse, breathing in the clean scent of cedar and success. The air felt entirely different now. The toxic energy my family had pumped into these walls for 2 years was rapidly evaporating. I walked over to the wet bar, poured myself a fresh glass of Cabernet, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked down at the snow-covered city streets, watching the tiny figures below, battling the brutal blizzard. I had spent 33 years fighting through a relentless storm of emotional abuse, manipulation, and constant comparison. Tonight I was finally warm. The next 30 days were a masterclass in natural consequences. I did not have to lift a single finger to punish them because their own staggering arrogance did all the heavy lifting. True to my word, I kept their biometric access strictly limited to the underground loading dock and the freight elevator. My security team sent me daily reports documenting the absolute humiliation my parents endured. Every morning, Yvonne was forced to drag her designer heels past industrial dumpsters and commercial laundry bins. She had to stand shoulder to shoulder with plumbers and delivery drivers, inhaling the scent of bleach and garbage while trying to maintain her wealthy matriarch posture. Calvin had to haul his expensive golf clubs and custom suits down a concrete service ramp, slipping on the icy pavement because he no longer had access to the heated VIP garage. But the physical indignity was absolutely nothing compared to the total annihilation of their social standing. Sister Beatrice did exactly what I knew she would do. She treated the spectacular events in the lobby like front-page news at the Sunday morning service. By Monday afternoon, the entire congregation knew that Yvonne and Calvin were bankrupt frauds who had sold out their own highly successful African-American daughter to worship a broke white finance bro. The church board held a private emergency meeting and officially asked Yvonne to step down from her position as head of the holiday planning committee, citing a desperate need for leadership with unquestionable financial integrity. Yvonne was stripped of her social crown overnight. She stopped attending Sunday service entirely unable to stomach the pitying whispers and judgmental stares from the very women she had spent decades looking down upon. Calvin fared no better in his elite circles. He had built his entire identity on projecting wealth and aggressive patriarchal authority. When the news of his impending eviction and Trevor's massive bankruptcy hit the local business community, Calvin lost his seat on two prestigious community boards. The men he golfed with, the executives he drank expensive bourbon with, simply stopped returning his calls. In our bourgeois social circle, the ultimate sin was not just losing your money. It was being exposed as a desperate imposter. Calvin had bragged endlessly about his Wall Street son-in-law, tying his own reputation directly to Trevor. When Trevor sank, Calvin went down right alongside him, drowning in the wreckage of his own misplaced pride. Meanwhile, the penthouse walls became a silent witness to the violent implosion of Kiara and Trevor picture-perfect marriage. With the illusion of unlimited wealth completely shattered, they turned on each other like starved animals. My security contractors reviewed the hallway audio logs and heard the daily screaming matches echoing through the thick oak doors. Kiara finally realized that her leased Porsche was days away from repossession, that her exclusive country club membership had been permanently revoked for non-payment, and that her platinum credit cards were maxed out beyond repair. She shrieked at Trevor, calling him a useless fraud, a pathetic liar who had ruined her life. Trevor screamed back, blaming her endless vanity and out-of-control spending habits for driving his hedge fund straight into the ground. The toxicity reached its boiling point on day 20. Trevor, being the absolute coward I always knew he was, simply abandoned ship. He packed a single duffel bag in the middle of the afternoon and walked out of the freight elevator, leaving Kiara holding the bag for hundreds of thousands of dollars in marital debt. Their messy public separation became the latest hot topic of gossip among their former wealthy friends. Kiara had spent her entire life acting as the untouchable golden child, feeding off my supposed failures to make herself feel superior. Now she was a soon-to-be divorced bankrupt woman with absolutely zero marketable job skills, forced to face a world that no longer cared about her designer wardrobe or her fake pedigree. As day 30 approached, the reality of their eviction finally forced their hands. They could not afford to hire a premium moving company, and they were far too terrified of being seen hauling boxes by the other wealthy tenants in the building. So they chose the coward route. On the 29th night at 3 in the morning, the security cameras captured a rusted rented moving truck pulling up to the freezing loading dock. I watched the high-definition feed from my office desk as Calvin and Kiara dragged heavy cardboard boxes through the service corridors, their faces pale and exhausted. Yvonne followed behind them, clutching a single decorative lamp, looking completely broken. They loaded their remaining possessions into the back of the cheap truck, slipping on the black ice, shivering in the dead of night. They relocated to a cramped, outdated two-bedroom apartment on the far side of town. It was a building with peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, and absolutely no prestige. It was exactly the kind of modest little life they had mocked me for supposedly living. Once they were gone, the desperate text messages began pouring in. Calvin sent long paragraphs demanding a sit-down meeting to negotiate a family truce. Kiara sent hysterical voice notes begging me for a short-term loan so she could hire a divorce attorney. Yvonne sent daily messages oscillating between aggressive maternal demands and pathetic pleas for forgiveness. She promised that things would be different if I just let them come back into my life and help them rebuild their reputation. I sat on my pristine velvet sofa in the quiet, immaculate penthouse, looking at the stream of messages lighting up my phone screen. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel an ounce of obligation. I simply tapped the screen, selecting their numbers one by one, and pressed the block button. I deleted their contact files, wiping their digital footprint from my life, just as effectively as I had wiped their access to my building. I never answered a single text. I never returned a single call. I silenced the noise, permanently choosing my own peace over their endless demands. Exactly 365 days have passed since I locked the heavy oak doors of this penthouse and shut out the toxicity that had defined my entire existence. Tonight, the air inside these walls feels fundamentally different. It is Christmas Eve again, but the suffocating pressure to maintain a flawless elite aesthetic has completely vanished. The sterile museum-like atmosphere my mother Yvonne painstakingly curated has been entirely erased. I spent the early months of the year stripping away the cold, monochromatic minimalism she obsessed over. I replaced the uncomfortable velvet lounge chairs with deep plush seating designed for actual human comfort. The walls now feature vibrant, original artwork by local Black artists. Instead of the generic, mass-produced modern art Trevor purchased to impress his fake finance friends. In the center of the great room stands a massive real Douglas fir tree. It is not decorated in Yvonne-preferred icy silver and white designer theme. Instead, it is draped in warm golden lights and covered with an eclectic mix of ornaments I collected throughout my travels and moments of genuine joy. The penthouse finally feels like a home because it is no longer a stage for a deceptive performance. The kitchen island where Yvonne once violently scrubbed the marble to erase my presence is now the center of absolute warmth and joyous chaos. I hired a private chef for the evening, but not to serve the tiny, pretentious portions of caviar and truffles that my sister Kiara used to demand. We are serving a feast that speaks to the soul. Rich braised short ribs, creamy baked macaroni and cheese, roasted root vegetables, and perfectly seasoned collard greens. The scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and slow-roasted garlic fills the sprawling 5,000 square feet, wrapping around my guests like a comforting embrace. There are no caterers tiptoeing around terrified of making a mistake. There are no hushed whispers or sharp criticisms about the presentation. There is only the loud, uninhibited sound of genuine laughter echoing off the high ceilings. I look across the room at the people who fill my space tonight. This is my chosen family. These are the individuals who stayed by my side when I was building my property acquisitions firm from the ground up, long before I had the capital to buy luxury real estate in cash. My head of security, David, is sitting by the fireplace holding a plate piled high with food. I invited him and his wife tonight because loyalty like his goes far beyond a simple paycheck. He stood between me and Trevor absolute terror last year, and he never once questioned my authority. Next to him is my chief operating officer, a brilliant woman named Chloe, who helped me double our commercial portfolio this past year. Without the constant draining distraction of my biological family, dragging me down, my business skyrocketed. I was no longer wasting my mental energy managing their fragile egos or subsidizing their fraudulent lifestyles. I channeled every ounce of that reclaimed power directly into my empire. And then there is Malik. He walks out of the kitchen carrying 2 glasses of spiced apple cider and hands one to me, with a warm smile that reaches his dark eyes. I met Malik 6 months ago at a commercial real estate symposium. He is a senior urban planner for the city, a man whose intellect and quiet confidence immediately caught my attention. Unlike Trevor, who needed to fake his wealth to feel like a man, Malik is entirely secure in his own skin. He has never once been intimidated by my success. He does not need me to shrink myself so he can feel large. When I told him the truth about my family and the events of last Christmas, he did not judge me or tell me to forgive and forget. He simply listened, held my hand, and told me that protecting my peace was the most valuable investment I could ever make. Malik looks at me now and I see absolute genuine admiration in his gaze. He loves the woman who works 14-hour days to close multi-million-dollar deals just as much as he loves the woman standing here in comfortable wide-leg trousers and a soft cashmere sweater. There is no performance with him. There is only truth. I take a sip of the warm cider and let my gaze drift over the joyous scene. It is striking how different my nervous system feels today. Last year, my body was in a constant state of fight or flight, anticipating the next insult, the next subtle dig, the next demand for money. My phone used to be a source of pure anxiety. A text notification meant Kiara was demanding funds for her luxury lifestyle. A phone call meant Calvin was issuing a mandate, or Yvonne was complaining about how my lack of a corporate husband was embarrassing her at church. Tonight, my phone rests silently on the console table. The screen is completely dark. I changed my personal number in January and distributed it to a highly exclusive list of trusted contacts. My biological parents and my sister do not have it. They have absolutely no access to me financially, emotionally, or digitally. The 90 missed calls of last Christmas Eve are a distant, fading memory replaced by an impenetrable fortress of boundaries. The silence they left behind was jarring at first. When you spend 33 years navigating a war zone, peace can initially feel like a trap. I spent the first few months of the year waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the retaliation or the public smear campaign. And while they certainly tried to spin their narrative to the church board, the sheer weight of their financial ruin made their lies impossible to sustain. You cannot pretend to be a victim of a cruel daughter when your son-in-law federal bankruptcy filings become public knowledge. You cannot project an image of blessed elite prosperity when you are forced to move your entire life into a cramped, outdated apartment building in the dead of night. The natural consequences of their own staggering arrogance handled the retaliation for me. I did not have to lift a finger to destroy them. They had already done the work themselves. I just stopped paying the bill to cover it up. Malik gently touches the small of my back, pulling me from my thoughts. He leans down, his voice a low, comforting rumble against my ear. "You are miles away, Jasmine. Are you all right?" I turn to him and smile, resting my free hand against his chest. "I am more than all right," I reply. "I was just thinking about the difference a year makes. Last year I was bracing for a war. Tonight I do not even have to wear armor." Chloe walks over, joining us by the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looks out at the snow falling gently over the city streets, then looks back at me. "I was talking to David earlier," she says, swirling the wine in her glass. "We were reminiscing about the lockdown sequence last year. He said it was the most flawless security operation he has ever run. You know, the industry rumor mill is still buzzing about how you handled the Trevor situation. The commercial real estate brokers downtown consider you an absolute legend. No one tries to lowball our firm anymore because they know exactly how ruthless you can be when pushed." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "I am not ruthless, Chloe. I am just no longer accommodating disrespect. There is a massive difference. For my entire life, I was taught that being a good daughter meant being a human sponge for my family toxicity. I was taught that African American women are supposed to carry the weight of the community, the weight of the family, and the weight of everyone else's failures without a single word of complaint. I was expected to finance the illusion of Black excellence for my parents, while they simultaneously told me I was not good enough. But true excellence is not an aesthetic. It is not a leased Porsche, or a fake hedge fund, or a front row seat at a megachurch. True excellence is integrity. It is building something real with your own two hands and refusing to let parasites drain your spirit." Chloe nods, raising her glass in a silent toast of agreement. "Well, whatever you call it, it worked. The firm revenue is up 40% and we just closed on the downtown high-rise project. You cleared the dead weight, Jasmine." She walks back to join the others near the fireplace, and Malik wraps his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. We stand there together, looking out through the pristine glass at the sprawling metropolis. The city lights twinkle through the falling snow, creating a breathtaking, glittering tapestry of gold and white. The streets below are quiet, blanketed in a thick layer of untouched snow. It is a stark contrast to the miserable, freezing slush my family trudged through when I banished them to the street. I realize in this exact moment that I do not hold any lingering hatred for Yvonne Calvin or Kiara. Hatred requires energy. It requires an emotional tether to the people who harmed you. What I feel now is absolute crystalline apathy. They are strangers who simply share my DNA. They are characters in a closed chapter of a book I no longer read. I do not care if Trevor ever found another job, or if Kiara ever learned how to survive without a platinum credit card. I do not care what narrative Yvonne spins in her cramped new apartment to make herself feel superior. Their lives are entirely irrelevant to the empire I continue to build. I have broken the generational curse of toxic loyalty. I have proven that you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the people who demand you shrink yourself to fit their narrow worldview. I chose myself. I chose my peace. I chose to fill my life with people who celebrate my ambition instead of resenting it. The evening flows effortlessly into the late hours. The food is consumed, the wine is poured, and the laughter continues to warm the massive penthouse. There is no anxiety gnawing at the edge of my consciousness. There is no fear of a sudden cruel remark designed to tear me down. Every single person in this room wants to be here, and every single person is valued. This is what true wealth feels like. It is not about the $10 million property, or the biometric locks, or the high-definition security cameras. It is about the absolute freedom to dictate who gets access to your energy. As midnight approaches, the guests begin to gather their things, exchanging warm embraces and heartfelt holiday wishes. David shakes my hand, thanking me for the generous bonus I provided his security team this year. Chloe hugs me tightly promising to call me on Monday to finalize the new acquisition contracts. When the final guest steps into the private elevator, the same elevator that shut my family out forever, I press my thumb against the biometric scanner one last time tonight. The silver doors close, sealing my sanctuary. The penthouse is quiet now, but it is a rich, comforting quiet. The golden lights of the Christmas tree reflect off the polished marble floors. Malik walks over to the sound system and puts on a soft, soulful jazz track. The smooth saxophone fills the space, wrapping around us perfectly. He walks back to me, taking the empty cider mug from my hand and setting it on the console table. He pulls me into a slow, gentle dance, swaying with me in the center of the great room. "You did it, Jasmine," he whispers, his voice incredibly tender. "You built a beautiful life." I lean my head against his chest, listening to the steady, reliable beat of his heart. "I did, we did," I correct him softly. I step out of his embrace just for a moment and walk over to the wet bar. I pour a final glass of my favorite vintage red wine, the exact same vintage my mother snatched out of my hands 1 year ago, claiming it was too cheap for her elite guests. I walk back over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, standing at the very edge of my domain. The snow is still falling silently, burying the past under a fresh, clean layer of white. I look at the reflection of the penthouse in the glass. I see the art I chose, the furniture I bought, the man who loves me standing patiently behind me. I see a 33-year-old black woman who survived the absolute worst of her own bloodline and emerged as an untouchable force of nature. My phone remains completely silent on the table, entirely free from toxic demands. There are no frantic voicemails, no desperate text messages begging for money, no manipulative tears. There is only the soft jazz music and the sound of my own steady breathing. I raise my crystal glass of wine toward the snowy night sky, offering a silent toast to the city below. I toast to the brutal clarity of betrayal. I toast to the absolute strength required to walk away. I toast to undeniable independence and the profound, unshakable peace that comes with it. But most of all, I toast to the sweetest revenge a person can ever achieve, simply protecting your own space and thriving beyond their wildest comprehension. Looking back at that chaotic Christmas Eve, The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about the power of money or the fleeting satisfaction of a perfectly executed revenge. It was about the absolute non-negotiable necessity of setting impenetrable boundaries. For years, I believed that being a good daughter meant shrinking myself to fit into a mold. My family created a mold specifically designed to keep me small so they could feel big. I was conditioned to believe that family loyalty meant absorbing their disrespect, secretly financing their illusions of grandeur, and sacrificing my own mental peace just to maintain their fake, picture-perfect aesthetic. But true liberation begins the exact moment you realize that shared DNA does not entitle anyone to abuse you. Financial independence certainly gave me the physical resources to buy that penthouse, but emotional independence gave me the sheer strength to finally lock the doors. We are so often expected to carry the heavy weight of our family's insecurities and shortcomings without a single word of complaint. We are expected to be the silent, invisible fixers. However, I learned the hard way that you cannot heal a toxic dynamic by simply funding it or quietly enduring it. You heal by confidently walking away. The most profound takeaway from my entire journey is that you possess the ultimate authority to choose your family. The people who genuinely belong at your dinner table will never ask you to perform or beg for your plate. They will celebrate your ambition, not resent it. Your worth is not determined by the people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the most beautiful, loving thing you can do for yourself is to change the locks, protect your energy, and thrive entirely on your own terms. If you have ever had to set hard boundaries to protect your peace from toxic family members, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget